Hey guys, welcome back to this game development series where we are creating a 2D mobile game using Flutter and Flame Engine. In the last video, we added this main menu from where players can tap on play button to start the game. And in the game over menu, we added a button using which players can go back to main menu. So in this video, I'm going to add background music and sound effects to this game. But before we get started with that, I'll quickly go over a bug that was reported by multiple early access testers. For some reason, the score text on some devices was not updating correctly. I was able to fix that bug by modifying the score calculation logic. What I did is, I added a new variable in DynoGame class of type double called elapsed time. And in the update method of DynoGame, I wrote a line to increment elapsed time by the delta time that we get as input to update. And when this elapsed time becomes greater than 1 over 60, I just reset the elapsed time and increment the score by 1. With this new code, as the score will not change on every frame, I'll move this line which updates score text inside this if check. And this simple change fixed the score update issue. Okay, so with that issue out of the way, let's start working on adding audio to this game. And the first step for this will be to get some audio assets. As usual, I have already got some assets downloaded, so I'll just copy them here. I've got these from itch.io and these are free to use. If you want to use the same assets, you can get the link from description. So under the giant sound pack folder, you can see that we have multiple folders for some of the common events that occur in a game. And if I go under HUD folder, you can see that there are multiple wave files for different types of HUD sound. So I'll be using this HUD7.wave for the hit sound when Dino gets hit by an enemy. So let's copy this to assets/audio folder. Then for the jump sound, I'll pick jump14.wave. And finally for the background music, I'll use the 8-bit platformer loop.wave from royalty-free music loops folder. And this is how it sounds. So once we have these three files, we can delete both these folders. Next step is to modify the main menu such that users can turn the audio for this game on or off. Right now, we have a text widget which displays the name of the game on screen. And below that, we have the raised button which starts the game. So below this raised button, I would like to add one more raised button which will take users to the game settings. But I don't want to create a new screen for settings and navigate users to that screen. Instead, I'll just switch the whole column with another column showing widgets for game settings. So to make things easier, I'll create a new file under widgets called menu.dart. This file will have a stateless widget called menu. And now I'll just copy the whole column from main menu.dart and paste it in the build method of menu class. For this gameplay widget, we'll have to import gameplay.dart from screens folder. And now here in the main menu, we can just create a menu widget. This will make it easier for us to swap the whole widget when required. Now just like menu.dart, I'll create one more file called settings.dart. This file will also contain a stateless widget and it will be called settings. To speed things up, I'll just copy the whole column from menu.dart and paste it in the build method of settings. Now here, this first text widget will display settings instead of Dino Run. Then next, instead of this raised button, I'll add a switch list tile. This widget creates a list tile with a toggle at the right end by default. So this widget needs two required properties. One is value and other one is onChanged. And let's just duplicate this widget one more time because I want to have two toggles. One for controlling sound effects and the other one for background music. So I'll set the text property of first switch list tile to text widget displaying SFX, which stands for sound effects. And the second one will display BGM, which stands for background music. The value property is used to indicate whether the toggle should be on or off. For now, I'll set this to true so that we don't get build errors. And onChanged will be an empty callback function for now. So below both this switch list tile, I'll add a icon button which will allow users to go back to previous menu. So icon for this will be back arrow icon with size as 30 and color as colors.white. And the on pressed will be empty for now. So back in menu.dart, I'll create one more raised button below the play button. This one will display settings and will take users to settings widget. Now both menu and settings widgets are ready. We just have to write code in main menu to display and swap between these two widgets. And for this, I'll be using animated crossfade widget. If you don't know how this widget works, you can check out my video on the same topic linked in the card above. Basically, animated crossfade allows us to switch between two predefined widgets based on the crossfade state. So this widget has 4 required properties. First is crossfade state, which decides which of the two child widgets should be displayed. Second property is duration, which controls how long the crossfade animation takes while switching between the widgets. And last two are first child and second child. These are the two widgets between which we want to switch. So to have the crossfade state, I'll first change the main menu class into a stateful widget. And then in the main menu state class, I'll create a new member of type crossfade state. I'll initialize this member with crossfade state.show first. And now we can set this as the crossfade state property of animated crossfade. For duration, I'll set 300 milliseconds. First child will be menu widget and second child will be settings widget. Now our animated crossfade is ready, but in the settings and menu widget, we still need to implement the onPressed for switching between the two widgets. So for this, I'll create two new methods called showMenu and showSettings. ShowMenu will just set the crossfade state to crossfade state.show first, and showSettings will set it to crossfade state.show second. Now we just have to call the correct method from menu and settings widget to switch between the two. So in the menu widget, I'll add a member to get reference to a function that should be called when the settings button is pressed. This will be a required property and should never be null. And now we can set this function as the onPressed for the settings button. In the animated crossfade, we can now set the showSettings function as the onSettingsPressed property of menu widget. Similar to this, in the settings widget, I'll add a member to get reference to a function that should be called when back button is pressed. This one will also be a required property which cannot be null. And I'll set this onBackPressed as the onPressed for back button. And in the animated crossfade, I'll set the onBackPressed for settings widget as showMenu function. Now all this is good, but it will still not work, because after changing the crossfade state, we have not written setState. If you want, you can do a simple setState in showMenu and showSettings, but I'll be using value listenable builder instead. So to start with, I'll wrap the animated crossfade in a value listenable builder. Then I'll change this crossfade state to a value notifier of type crossfade state. Let's also rename it to crossfade state notifier. In the init state, I'll initialize this notifier with initial value as crossfade state.show first. Now in the show menu and show settings, instead of changing the crossfade state, we'll have to modify the value of crossfade state notifier to show first and show second respectively. Now we can set the crossfade state notifier as value listenable property of value listenable builder. And finally, I'll use the builder of this value listenable builder to return the animated crossfade widget. And now this crossfade state property will use the value that we get as input to this builder function. This builder function will get called automatically whenever the value of value listenable object changes. So let's see how this works out when we launch the game. Okay, so as you can see, we now have this new button called settings. And once I click on it, we smoothly fade to the settings widget. And if I press back, it again fades to the menu widget. This is fine, but there are few problems in this. The titles of switch list style on settings widget are not visible clearly. And the width of background card also becomes too large on settings widget. For the titles of switch list style, I'll set font size to 30 and color to colors.white. This looks good now. Next, to limit the width of card, I'll wrap the column with a container and I'll set the width of this container to 300. So now the UI part is done. Next, we need to write code to play the background music and sound effects depending on the value set in settings. It is possible to directly call the method from Flame Engine to play the audio files. But as we have to check the user preferences every time before we play any audio, it will be much easier if we create our own class for managing audio. So for this, I'll create a new file under game folder called audiomanager.dart. This file will contain a class called Audio Manager. As we need a central place for managing all audio, it will be bad if there are more than one instance of this class while the game is running. So to block creation of an object of Audio Manager from outside the class, I'll create a private named constructor called internal. And to store reference to single instance of Audio Manager, I'll create a static member of type Audio Manager called instance. This will be initialized with the private constructor we defined above. And to get a reference to this private instance from outside the class, I'll create a static getter called instance. Then next, I'll add two value notifier of type bool. These notifiers will hold the current value of SFX and BGM. Now, to initialize these notifiers and call some of the initialization code from Flame Engine, I'll create a method called init. First thing that I'll do in this method is I'll call flame.bgm.initialize. This call is not necessary, but it will make sure that background music gets automatically paused when the game is not running or is in the background. Then next, I'll call flame.audio.loadAll. This method takes a list of audio file names and loads them into the cache. This makes sure that all the required audio files are loaded and ready to be played as soon as we request Flame to do so. So to get these files, I'll add a list of string to the init method. And now this list can be passed to loadAll. As loadAll returns a future, I'll await for it to complete. This means init method will now have to be marked as async. Now for the next part, we need a package called Hive. Hive is an easy to use NoSQL database, and we'll use it to store the options set by users in settings menu so that when the game is launched next time, those settings are preserved. So I'll add this dependency in pubspec of our project. Now in the init method of Audio Manager, I can call hive.openbox. So in Hive, you store everything inside boxes. And these boxes can be created or opened by calling openbox and passing in the name of that box. In this case, I'll name the box as preferences because it will store user preferences. As openbox is also an async method, I'll await for it to complete. And it returns a reference to the opened box. And as we will need this box at multiple places in Audio Manager, I'll create a member of type box called pref. And then we can store the opened box in this pref. So once we have this box, we can call .get method on it to get the value at a given key. This key needs to be a string. So here I'll try to get the value at a key called BGM. And if this value turns out to be null, it means that user has not set any preferences yet. If this is the case, what I'll do is I'll call pref.put to store the default value of BGM, which in our case will be true, because I want the background music to be on when the game is launched for the very first time. So I'll do the same thing for SFX too. And once this is done, we can initialize SFX and BGM with value notifiers with initial values stored in preferences. This will make sure that when we initialize the Audio Manager, the initial values of SFX and BGM notifiers are read from the values stored in Hive. Now, as these notifiers are private, I'll create a getter for each one of them that can be used to access them. Next, to change the value of SFX, I'll add a new method called setSFX. This method will take a boolean as input, and inside this method, first I'll update the value stored in Hive using pref.put with key as SFX, and then I'll change SFX.value to given boolean. Similar to this, I'll add one more method called setBGM, which will change the value of BGM in Hive and the value notifier. Now we can go to main.dart file. Here in main method, after setting full screen and landscape mode, I'll get the instance from audio manager and will call init method on it. This method needs a list of audio files to be loaded into cache. So I'll pass in the name of the 3 audio assets. Then next, in the settings.dart file, I'll wrap the first switch list style with a value listenable builder. Value listenable for this will be audio manager.instance.listenable sfx. This switch list style will have to be returned from the builder of this value listenable builder. And instead of hard coding the value for this switch list style to true, we can now use the input value that we get in this builder. Let's repeat the same thing for the second switch list style too. The only difference will be in the second case, value listenable will be audio manager.instance.listenable bgm. And now, in the onChanged of this switch list styles, we can call audio manager.instance.setSFX and setBGM with the new changed value. This will update the value stored in Hive as well as the value notifier stored inside audio manager. And as those notifiers are added as value listenables in these switch list styles, the state of toggle on UI will also get updated without having to do any set state. And just to make this more readable, I'll rename the input value to builder functions as isSFX on and isBGM on. Now before we build and run this code, we'll have to also initialize the Hive package. And this will have to be done before initializing audio manager. So to do this, we'll just have to call hive.init. But init method needs a path where all the Hive data should be stored. And most of the times this location is given as the current app's document directory because it does not need explicit read and write permissions from users. So to get this path, I'll add a package called path provider. You can see that it has this function named getApplicationDocumentDirectory, which is all that we need. I'll copy the dependency for this package into our pubspec file. Now in the menu.dart, before calling hive.init, I'll call getApplicationDocumentsDirectory. This is also an async call, so I'll have to wait for it and store the result in a variable called dir. And now we can pass in dir.path as input to hive.init. And that is it. Now let's run the game to see the changes. So here, if I go to the settings and tap on these toggles, you can see that now the toggle states are changing correctly. Even if I go back and forth between the main menu and settings menu, you can see that the values are preserved. And just to check if this is also preserved across multiple sessions, I'll set SFX to off and BGM to on, and then we'll close the app. And now if I run it again and go to the settings menu, you can see that both the values were preserved correctly. So now let's add some methods that will start and stop the audio. We'll need exactly 5 methods for this, and they will be start BGM, pause BGM, resume BGM, stop BGM, and play SFX. Out of these, start BGM and play SFX will take a file name as input. So in the first 4 methods, the first thing that I'll do is I'll check if the current value of BGM is true. This will make sure that we do not execute any of the audio calls from Flame Engine if BGM is off. Now in start BGM, inside this if check, we can call flame.bgm.play, passing in the input file name. Here I'll set the volume to 0.4 so that the background music isn't too loud. Next, in the pause BGM method, we can call flame.bgm.pause. This will pause the current playing background music, if any. Similar to this, I'll add flame.bgm.resume and flame.bgm.stop in resume BGM and stop BGM respectively. Next, in the play SFX method, I'll first add a check to make sure that current value of SFX is true. And then inside this check, I'll call flame.audio.play with file name as input. The difference between play method of flame.bgm and flame.audio is that BGM keeps looping the given file, whereas audio just plays the given file once. So for playing the jump and hit sound effects, we'll need to use play SFX, and for background music, we'll need start BGM. This completes our audio manager. Now we can go to game.dart and start using this class. So to start the background music as soon as the game starts, I'll go to DynoGames constructor, and as the last step, I'll call audiomanager.instance.startbgm. Here we'll have to specify the file name of audio asset that we want to play. Then next, in the pause game method, I'll call audiomanager.instance.pausebgm at the end. This will pause the background music as soon as the game is paused. Then next, in resume game method, I'll call audiomanager.instance.resumebgm to resume the background music when the game gets resumed. And similar to this, in the game over and reset method, I'll call pause BGM and resume BGM respectively. And finally, we need to stop the background music completely when player goes back to main menu. For that, I'll override the onDetach method in DynoGame. This method will get called automatically when we go back to main menu. So in this method, I'll call audiomanager.instance.stopbgm. So this takes care of background music completely. Next, let's go to the Dyno class to add jump and hit sound effects. Here in the hit method, after reducing the value of life by 1, I'll call audiomanager.instance.playsfx with file name of the hit sound effect. Similar to this, in the jump method, after changing the speed to -500, I'll again call playsfx with the jump sound effect. And that is it. Now let's build and run this to check if we can hear these sounds. First, let's make sure that both SFX and BGM are on in the settings. Now if I press play, we should hear the audio. Okay, so as you saw, everything seems to be working fine. Even when I paused the game, background music got paused. Now let's see if this resumes correctly when I resume the game. Okay, and this also seems to be working fine. Now if I go to settings in main menu and turn off SFX, we should not be able to hear the jump and hit sound effects. Okay, this is also working fine. Now let's turn off the background music and keep SFX on. And as you can see, now only the jump and hit sounds are playing. Background music has stopped. So before we end this video, I'll fix some minor bugs. So once the game is over, if you tap on the screen, you'll be still able to hear the jump sound. Also, if I press on the pause button while the game is over, it still puts the pause game overlay on top of the game over menu. So to fix these bugs, I'll add two boolean members in DynoGame class. One will be called isGameOver and the other one will be called isGamePaused. Initial values for both of these will be false. And then in the gameOver method, I'll set isGameOver to true, and in the reset method, I'll set it to false again. So now in the onTapDown method, we can check if the value of isGameOver before calling dyno.jump. This will fix the issue on gameOver menu, but on the pause menu, we can still hear the jump sound. So here, we'll also have to make sure that we call dyno.jump only if game is not over and game is not paused. And similar to isGameOver, I'll set isGamePaused to true in pause game and false in resume game. This will fix the issue on pause menu as well. Now to avoid displaying pause menu when game is already over, we can add an if check in pause game before calling add widget overlay. This will make sure that we add the pause menu overlay only when game is not over. Also, we'll have to set isGamePaused to true only when we display the pause menu. The final bug that I found was a little difficult to spot. This happens only when you click on retry on the game over menu. Basically, when the game restarts, we reset the spawn timer back to 4 seconds in reset method of enemy manager. But when we do that, we don't start the timer. As a result, when the game restarts, first enemy is spawned only after the spawn level increases by 1 and the timer gets restarted with the new wait time. So to fix this, we just have to call timer.start after resetting it in the reset method. So that was it for this video, and probably this series too. We now have a pretty decent clone of the T-Rex game with minor differences. There are a lot more things that you can add into this game if you want, but I think the amount of topics we have covered in this series should be enough for getting introduced with Flame Engine. I'll surely be adding more features to this game, but that will be a personal project. If you are interested in seeing how it turns out, you can check the Play Store and itch.io links given in the description below. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this series and learned something new. If you did, hit that like button and maybe consider subscribing for more such content. I hope to see you in the next series of videos.